Hawkins, Indiana has had a rough couple of years, primarily if you're Will Byers, or a friend of Will Byers, or Will Byers' friend's siblings. You know, for a kid who seems to be at the center of the action, he sure gets forgotten really quickly. But then again, the town of Hawkins in general is pretty good at forgetting things. Things like... Stranger Things begins the way all subsequent seasons of the show would begin. Panicked scientists dealing with them meddling with forces they don't understand.
Here's a story that's really scarifying. Oh, brother.
What really gets the ball rolling for the series, though, is when Will meets the creature eventually dubbed the Demogorgon. In the party's favorite pastime, Dungeons and Dragons, that is before they discovered kissing and saving the world, the Demogorgon is the self-proclaimed Prince of Demons, with 2 baboon heads, because why not? Over the course of the first season, they established that blood can attract the Demogorgon, but Will didn't have a scratch on him.
Well, that's not my recollection.
When the Demogorgon came across Will, chased him down, and then stored him in the Upside Down like a squirrel storing a nut. What makes Will so special? Barb lasted all of a few minutes in the Upside Down. Is there something about Will that we need to know?
I think you're right.
The disappearance of Will is a big deal in the small town of Hawkins. Apparently not as much as Barb. Poor Barb. It's a big enough deal that when the supposed body of Will showed up, there was an assembly and a funeral and grief counseling and Chief Hopper punching a lot of people. Though that was because he was not buying the whole Will is dead, see, here's the body thing. Naturally, our heroes were right, and Will was ducking the Demogorgon in the Upside Down and playing with the lights in his house to talk to his mom. Some heroics, more punches, Elle flipping a van. Eventually, Will is returned to the Upside Right, and all is right in the world. Aside from the fact that Will's mom would tell anyone that listened that that corpse wasn't her son, everyone was on board with the body they called Will they buried. Now a boy called Will is walking around talking and everything. The biggest reaction from the town, you ask? To call Will Zombie Boy. No one is freaking out trying to figure out who they just buried if it wasn't Will? Or why they were so convinced it was Will if Will is standing right there. It makes no sense. If it was rightfully blamed on Dr. Brenner, that raises way more questions. Like, why was a scientist meddling in a missing persons case of a 13-year-old kid? Did the entire town end up in a somebody else's problem field from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Not every unexplained thing is a plot hole. I know what the title says, but there's only so much room for a nuanced breakdown of all the content involved. It also doesn't tell you we're gonna make obscure references, but we just referenced a line from Life, the Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams. So this one's not so much a plot hole as it is an unexplained aspect of a world full of a lot of unexplainable things that give Stranger Things its mysterious veneer. When members of the party take a trip down the hidden freight elevator masquerading as a loading dock, Lucas's sister insists that she's gonna drink the green glowing goo in a science canister if they're trapped in the secret elevator for too long. Unsurprisingly, given all the clues, the green goo is not a refreshing beverage. When the canister breaks after holding the door open long enough to escape, the goo eats through the floor. What the heck is that stuff? Gorgon blood like xenomorphs? An early formula for slime that was buried by Nickelodeon after the first cast of You Can't Do That on television mysteriously disappeared? We'll probably never know, but in this case, that's part of the mystique of the town called Hawkins. There's a truism about film that suggests we can watch hundreds of people get mowed down in a movie and feel almost nothing, but if someone kicks a dog, by golly, they're the worst person ever. John Wick went on a rampage that ultimately shook the very organization of hired killers after someone killed his dog. We take this pet business very seriously. Which is odd, because Chester seemed to have vanished and no one has even mentioned it. While his name is never said on screen, Chester is Will's loyal dog who greets his boy eagerly as said boy runs home away from the Demogorgon and barks at the beast when he shows up at the Byers door. He also gives Chief Hopper his first clue and bids a sad farewell to Will at Fort Byers during the funeral, and then never seen again. Chances are he has been sent upstate to a farm to run around with other dogs, but there doesn't seem to be any mention of it.
Nah, none of that. Let's have a little enthusiasm.
Though, in fairness, the party and those around them have had a lot of things going on just to stop and lament the dog Will once had. If you ask most people in and around town about Hopper, not a lot of great adjectives might come up. He's often portrayed as giving little to no regard to eating or anything resembling nutritious. He smokes like a chimney. Most of the town has little faith in him as sheriff. Even Joyce doesn't think much of him until he starts believing her son isn't dead, but in another dimension.
I love him. He's a great guy. I love him.
Yet when it comes time for action, Chief Hopper has talents for throwing hands. Guards at top secret research facilities, a little chin music and they're out. Russian spies guarding an even more top secret research facility still get a down-home beatdown from the down-home sheriff. Super spy who literally lifted a scientist by his neck to make a point? It might take a minute, but he's still no match for the sheriff of a small town in Indiana. For some reason, Hawkins has a super cop as their sheriff. It might be a bit of that good old John McClane magic. When you take a New York cop out of New York and put him in an extreme situation, they become action heroes. When Elle encounters the party, she has a hard time communicating, partially because she's scared, partially because she has limited vocabulary. There's no real reason for that to be the case. Papa talked to her in regular casual sentences, and she interacted with the medical staff and at least briefly with other test subjects. But her inability to communicate aside, there's a bit of a mystery that pops up in the second season for Elle and the first season for Hopper and Joyce. Elle has a mom who did not fare well after the experiments that resulted in a super baby. Not only did she have a mom, but she also had a 4 reals name and not a number. And it's Jane. But instead of going all prisoner and claiming loudly, "I am not a number," she continues to go by Elle, only briefly going by Jane when she teams up with a group of vigilantes run by her sister in experimentation. Why is she still going by her test subject designation instead of a real name though? Sure, she's used to being called Elle by the party, but she also wants to be normal, or a reasonable facsimile of normal, which is really all any of us can hope for anyways. One of the most reoccurring themes in horror stories is that when the creepy house with the moving furniture and opening doors yells, "Get out!" the characters don't.
You will die slowly. Your stomach will swell.
I wouldn't walk down a hallway if it made a sound I didn't recognize. I've even sent the cat to investigate a strange sound that turned out to be raccoons. I think I may have lost a little bit of my cat's respect that night, and cats don't generally have a lot of respect for humans to begin with. Given all that, it takes Will getting kidnapped into the Upside Down, possessed by the Mind Flayer, and almost possessed again after the Russians built a bad idea device under the mall before the buyers think, boy, maybe we should live somewhere else. The Fresh Prince got shipped off to Bel Air after one little fight. What's in Hawkins that's so compelling that it keeps the family of the party there despite all the shadowy government agencies and beings of unspeakable horror terrorizing them? I don't understand. Along with all the missing persons, and formerly missing persons, Hawkins has had a lot of closures, and had other high-profile shenanigans. Thanks to Nancy and Jonathan Byers' recording of the head of the research lab, confessing the research lab is not only closed, but Barb finally gets a little bit of closure since, quote, Barb was consumed by an otherworldly creature of unimaginable horror that was unleashed when our experiments of breeding supernatural spies went sideways, end quote. That was going to be a hard sell. So instead, she was poisoned by leaked gas as far as the world knows. I mean, at that point, only Nancy and Barb's mom seemed to care. That weird kid came back from the dead. Hawkins has had all the miracles it's gonna get. To get rid of that secret Russian bad idea science lab under the newly constructed mall, the mall is set on fire. But is this really the best way to do it? Now the place is flooded with first responders, and the fire damage might expose the secret facility, and now you gotta convince them that it was nothing. Contamination probably would have been a better excuse. They already set the precedent with Barb. In general, the secret Russian lab has had a lot of issues. A year before, a stern Russian leader man told the scientists they only had 1 year. A year later, they had a fully functional door portal knocker built several layers below the mall that's been around long enough to close local businesses. Making it a mall covers people's comings and goings. But it's also now a venue where teenagers and others gather frequently enough to also note strange behavior. However, nothing is stranger than a construction crew digging several stories deep hole in a ground and then transporting a giant science ray to it and assembling it all while they're supposed to be building a mall. If they used local labor at any part, they'd question certain aspects. And if they used their own labor, that too would cause a stir. Murray the conspiracy theorist should really have been all over the extraordinary extraordinary circumstances the mall was built under. For that matter, why was the Russian agent sending out Russian codes while sitting next to the kiddie rides for Steve to recognize the song in the background?
Ooh.
The Russians are bad at secret plans. There is another case of something not being a plot hole. Just something we're all looking forward to figuring out in the next season. And that is, what's the deal with Elle's powers? There's already the issue of what does her telekinesis have to do with what she's designed for, which is to slip into the Upside Down and spy on people. Once she closes the gate on the Mind Flayer, even though the last shot indicates that the Mind Flayer was on the wrong side of the gate, Elle's powers seem to have gone away when she isn't able to move a suitcase with her mind. Perhaps she closed off access to the Upside Down, and the Upside Down was the source of her power. Maybe she's in crisis of self like Peter Parker in Spider-Man 2. Whatever the answer is, we're bound to find out when season 4 hits. This is another one of those things that isn't really a plot hole as much as it is a feature of the setting of the series that gives it a little dimension. As it turns out, a bunch of middle school kids who use the Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual to contextualize the various beings of unimaginable horror and who call the pocket dimension from whence they came the Upside Down because a barely auditory kid they met flipped over their board game to demonstrate it. They don't have the most complete grasp of how the rules work in this nether realm.
Oh, in class, as soon as I get back, there's going to be a surprise quiz on this material.
The adults in their lives are too busy trying to save the kids or endanger the kids to stop them, and give a complete breakdown of how everything works. All of which means the rules of how and when physical objects from our world manifest in the Upside Down seem to operate in their own rules that we may never know, the same way the party will probably never know either. At the end of season 1 of Stranger Things, it seemed to all the world that Elle sacrificed herself to make the bad thing go away. As far as everyone else is concerned, she's off with Barb, and I guess Tupac recording a secret album that no one will get to hear. Except she's not. She's hiding in the forest, wolfing down Eggo waffles left out by Chief Hopper. Most of the drama of season 2 revolves around keeping Elle being alive secret even from the party. Which makes sense. Eleven is a walking bioweapon that can eavesdrop on just about anyone at any time, without having to pretend to be a telephone repair technician to plant bugs. The government is going to want that back, even if Hawking's research facility has a new, kinder, gentler, mad scientist in charge. At the end of season 2, Hopper gets the good doctor to give Elle a cover so that she can live a semblance of a normal kid life. No one involved with the project notices that the sheriff at the gooey center of a thwarting super science nonsense twice has a new young ward the exact same age as their experimental bioweapon. The party has a nice spread of home lives. Steve and Nancy come from a semi-idyllic nuclear family, even though Mama Wheeler briefly considers an illicit liaison with a hot young lifeguard with the mullet. You'll regret that, man, trust me. That and that rat tail you had in junior high. Wait, I may be projecting that last part. Will and Jonathan have a loving and intense mother and an absentee father, but perhaps no one has it worse than Max and Billy, step-siblings with an abusive father. One thing we know is that Billy did not like moving from California to Indiana since the move was perpetrated by Max's mom needing distant from Max's dad. Billy blames her. Is that it though? Was that really the catalyst that triggered the move that makes Billy blame Max and not, say, his new stepmom? There's a likely answer, but it's way too much of a bummer for this video. It's not just the kids that seem to have a slippery understanding of the Upside Down. Even the scientists don't seem to have it nailed down. And not just because they keep releasing unimaginable horrors that they can't control. They tell Hopper and Joyce they need hazmat suits because the air is toxic. But Will has been there all week. It's not the air that gets Barb, it's the Demogorgon. No wonder they keep unleashing horrors. They don't really know what they're doing either. That tracks, actually. This is less of a plot hole and more of a product of the movie that inspired Stranger Things and the strange nature in which Generation X, which these kids are smack dab in the middle of, were raised. Stranger Things is in the genre Elliot Kalan of the Flophouse refers to as kids with flashlights. That's your E.T.s and Goonies where largely unsupervised kids get into widely inappropriate and dangerous situations. Mostly that is, as the screenwriter would say, so that the movie can happen. But mostly that was kinda how Gen X were raised, at the time called latchkey kids. Gen X was the children boomers didn't want, and millennials were the children boomers planned and shifted to helicopter parenting. Neither approach were great. Fun fact, Winona Ryder was born on the same year the fictional main characters were born, 1971, meaning she's now as old as they would be now. I'm tired. Another kind of plot hole that's more of a trope of the genre. When Max is helping Elle learn about life outside kissing Mike, she takes Elle on a classic 80s shopping montage, which results in the girls emerging from the mall stores with bags of new threads. Max's family isn't exactly raking in dough, and Chief Hopper doesn't want Elle at the mall in the first place, even if he did have mad money to give her. So, where's this money coming from? That is the question most shopping montages ignore, because the realities of teenage economics are kind of a bummer.
Thanks for your attention.